All Roadrunners are awesome, aren't they? Well, not really. And today we're going to take a look at the unfortunate events that brought the Roadrunner to an end.
Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution. Once again, back up here at Desert Valley Auto Parts. We're at the Black Canyon City location. That's where they have a lot of the 60s and 70s stuff, a lot of muscle cars and fun things like this 1974 Roadrunner. In our last walk around, we asked you, which cars do you want to see us focus on? And this is one of the cars people mentioned in the comments, which reminds me, make sure you like and subscribe and leave your comments down below. I want to know what you think about what we find up here and maybe something in the back that might interest you. So we all know the story of the Roadrunner by now, right? It goes back to 1968. Plymouth was trying to find a car that would appeal to a younger demographic. One of the things that they did was they consulted with an old colleague of mine, a gentleman I used to work with when I first started doing the Barrett-Jackson auction. His name was Brock Yates. He was also the editor for Car and Driver back then. And Brock Yates' advice was very simple. He said, quit trying to make things fancy and expensive. Strip it down as much as humanly possible and put the biggest engine up front that you can so it can appeal to a younger demographic so they can get as much performance as they can possibly afford, which seemed like a great idea to the Plymouth folks. And then they thought, wait a minute, if we're appealing to a younger demographic, let's take it one step further. Not only will we do what Brock said, where we have a simple car with a lot of performance, we'll also add something that will appeal, the Roadrunner. Now, they paid Warner Brothers $50,000 to be able to use that emblem, which at the time seemed like a ridiculous amount of money, but looking back on it, was probably a pretty decent deal. They also spent another $10,000 developing the horn that went into the Roadrunner. You know, the beep beep, because they wanted to make it sound like that sound as the Roadrunner went by. Now, 68 and 69, probably the high water marks for the Roadrunner. It was a great car, great performance. 1970, 71, they restyled it. I'm a big fan of that restyle. 73 and 74, that's this generation of the body style. Got a little more square. The next year, 75, they went off in a completely different direction. It was, well, more formal looking. And then by 1976, the Roadrunner name was simply, well, a styling option on the Volare, where it continued all the way through 1980. But this was the 1974 version. Not as much performance as you were going to get on some of those earlier ones, but you still had a cool striping package. We'll talk about the biggest engine that was available in just a moment, and we'll walk around and take a look at this car sitting here at Desert Valley that's missing a few parts. So as I mentioned, the styling changed in the 1973 and 74 models. 1970 and 71, they had a section that kind of came up, went up like this, and then went back down. This has more of a squared off look. You couldn't get rectangular headlights at this point in time. That wouldn't become legal until 1975. This still, of course, has the cute little Plymouth Roadrunner. But I like the styling concept that they came up with in 1970 and really continued through this 1974 model. They used to call it the fuselage styling, and that's what they were going after. Once again, kind of the aircraft theme. I like the styling package with the stripe that goes all the way across the roof, comes down, shows you Roadrunner right there, and then goes up. Of course, we're missing a fender, but that does give us a chance to look at the front suspension here and notice the fact that, guess what? Not an awful lot of rust. This is an Arizona car. Underneath the hood, the most common engine that you would have gotten here was a 318 cubic inch. I think it was good for 170 horsepower, maybe 150 net. Your next option up from that was a 360. That replaced the 340 that had had the year before. That had 245 horsepower. You got a 400 cubic inch engine. That was good for a whopping 250 horsepower. But the big dog, that was the 440 GTX V8. That was good for 275 horsepower. However, only about 386 people ordered that, so if you can get your hands on one of those, that's pretty rare. Looking at the fender tag for this, this is a 318. That's what it started off life as. By the way, technically, you could get a 3-speed manual. Very few people opted for that. Most people went for the automatic, the Torque Flight, and that's exactly what I see when I open the door. I think, let's see, yep, there's the automatic right there. Now, rumor has it that there was one 4-speed manual that did come out of the factory. If you're the lucky person that has that, you have something very special indeed. But in terms of performance, 170 horsepower, 150 or so net really wasn't pretty spectacular in 1974. Although, having said that, it was what we call the Malay Era. There just really wasn't a lot of performance that was coming out. What you were getting for this car in this 1974 version, you were getting looks, you were getting style, you were getting that cool stripe that went all the way down the side. And while it didn't have the same performance that a Roadrunner might have had just a few years before, you still had the Roadrunner name, and a lot of people didn't realize it wasn't as high performance as it had been a few years before, so they still thought it was pretty darn cool. Now, as I mentioned, the Roadrunner started off with a very simple and very basic concept. Strip everything off that doesn't relate to performance. Just put floor mats in there. You don't need to put fancy carpeting. And that worked fine for a couple years. But as time went along, well, they had to get a little fancier. I mean, they actually offered leather seats. I don't think these are leather. They offered thicker carpeting. And so it became a nicer car slowly but surely, because if you couldn't offer performance, you had to offer something, and the Roadrunner name and that cute little badge wasn't going to be enough. Of course, you still got rally gauges and cool things. That's what it looks like inside the door right there. This particular one here at Desert Valley Auto Parts isn't the kind of thing you'd normally see, because look at this, there's a fair amount of rust. I'm gonna guess this spent most of its life someplace else. Oh, look at what looks like it may have originally been a blue color underneath there. And then when you look underneath, yeah, looks like the rear end, the whole rear axle is missing out of there. In fact, a lot of the drivetrain is missing. Plenty of rust down here on the bottom, but once again, it's being parted out at this point in time, so that's fine. Underneath the hood, as I mentioned, most, I think 2/3 of the 9,600 Roadrunners that were built in 1974 got the 318. This one's had an aftermarket Edelbrock carburetor put on it, because why not put a little more performance, aftermarket performance, on a car that just didn't have a lot? So while it may be a little frustrating to look at what the Roadrunner originally was back in 1968 and 69 to what it had become by 1974, you also have to look at what was going on in the country at that point in time. I remember, especially in the automotive industry. I mean, in 1974, they brought out the Mustang II, a radical departure from what the Mustang had been, which actually sold very well in the 1970s. We don't look fondly on it back today. You don't see many of those in the collector car world. But the Mustang II was a big seller because it was smaller. It got better fuel mileage, and that's exactly what everybody needed. Another thing that was going on in the 1970s was insurance companies, well, a few years earlier, they had started to wise up, and they realized that, wait a minute, you're getting a big engine in this, there's a good chance you're going to have an accident. You're going to do something that's going to cost the insurance company more. So the bigger the engine, the more the performance, the more the insurance rates went up, and that was another factor that they had to look at when someone was buying one of these cars. Not only was there potential to eat more fuel, but it was going to be the insurance cost. So as a result, everything was slowly but surely changing in the 1970s. And this car, this 1974 Roadrunner, I think you could argue really it was the end of that first concept of what the Roadrunner was. Because remember, by 1975, they went to a much different look, a more formal look. And after that, it was really just an option package in terms of looks for the Volare cars up until 1980. So the Roadrunner was cool in its day, but by 1974, it was slowly but surely sliding down that hill. This car is definitely not what you would have gotten in 68 or 69, but at least you got style. At least you got that Roadrunner, at least you got that horn up front that went beep, beep.
If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to check out my buddy Steve Munyante's YouTube channel. He's got tons of great junkyard crawls.